So John, tell us a little bit about the problem you're trying to solve with Smart Privilege Log.
Well, our privilege log application is to solve the problem that I'm sure many people have encountered with the cost of doing privilege logs and the time it takes, including the pressure of time as, just like now, we're coming at the end of the process. It's always at the end of the process. It's always really important that it gets done quickly, but these are the most important documents in your case that you're trying to be very careful with, so you're also deploying your most expensive resources on dealing with them. And we've been stuck for a long time in a very manual way of doing this, even with all the technology that we had. So we look to try to solve that issue.
And
I was just going to ask, other than speed, what are some of the challenges or complexities of privilege review and producing a privilege log?
Well, the privilege log needs to be correct. It needs to have the correct input. It needs to match what's in the database, needs to match what's on the privilege log, that if you've been producing interim privilege logs out to the other side, you need to retain that data and make sure everything's matching up as review is ongoing and you're still reviewing and producing more privilege logs. So there are a lot of details that when you don't have good version control and when things are going in and out of the database are really tough to manage.
Okay.
how do you predict the normalized names?
Our names normalization process, which takes care of kind of one of the modules of our privilege log application, goes through documents that are identified as being part of a potential privilege log, and it parses out the email IDs from any of the documents that are enabled to be part of the log. And we also have a feature where we can go down into the lower parts of the thread, into the text, and also parse those headers and pull email IDs up from those headers. From there, we take a first cut at the names. So there's an automatic prediction that will predict many of the names. If it's john.olson at lawfirm.com, it will say, all right, we predict this is John, first name, Olson, last name, and associate it with the email ID. And if you then have johnolson@gmail.com, it will also associate that normalized name with both of the email addresses. And it's first cut in an area where if you can get that first 75% of them correct, that's an enormous time saver and eliminates entire coding teams from the former process.
The adoption of this thing has been really great, right?
It has been. I think anybody who has done privilege logs and works in it, once they see it, it seems intuitively that it's going to save time and money, and I'm sure there are plenty of people here who'd like to get some of that time back that they've spent working with privilege logs under extreme time pressure at the end of a case.
We were talking earlier, and you have a little bit of a diverse background in terms of product. Why this application? You probably have a lot of ideas. Why did you focus on this?
Sure. In my practice as an attorney, before joining Lighthouse, I've spent an inordinate amount of time working on privilege logs, and I kind of wanted to, it's part that there's a problem out there that I think we could address with technology, and part it's a personal thing that, it's been kind of therapeutic to work through this with the engineering team and get a process in place using the technology to avoid a lot of that manual work that, I just wanted to turn the page, so to speak, on the era of those handcrafted, artisan, locally sourced privilege logs and get something that's acceptable, it's defensible, and it gets most of the work done without a lot of human input.
So we have name normalization, we have reporting. What are some of the other elements of the solution?
Sure. In addition to the names normalization, we have dynamic privilege review layouts so that your review team is actually building your privilege log as they go through. And instead of needing to just see all the different fields that they've coded and imagine what the description will look like on the privilege log, we have our privilege description concatenated right there on the fly for the reviewer to see, did I craft the sentence I wanted to, so that if they didn't, they can change a few of the codes, save it again, and see the results right there. And it's also updating in the privilege log draft itself.
Okay.
Can we take a look at a couple of screenshots?
Sure. This is our names normalization screen. On the left, we have a list of unnormalized email IDs that have been pulled out of either the text or headers of documents. And on the right side in the grid, you have first name, middle name, last name, and qualifier that have been already normalized to one or more email IDs that were found in the database. The great thing about it is when new data gets put into the database, into the review, when reviewers are continually marking documents privileged or redacted, those documents are being swept up, and if there is a normalized name already, those IDs are automatically being associated as well. And here we have the coding layouts that I described with the privilege description field third up from the bottom, where it gives you the whole sentence as it will appear on the log, which is a real great user experience for the reviewer and cuts down on a lot of QC time and a lot of editing later. And we also use event handlers. We have a lot of required fields and try to contain people's creativity in creating privilege logs. While every document has its own special snowflake of privilege on it, there is kind of a universe of things that you can say in most cases and have an acceptable privilege log. Okay. And then this is just an example of the output. The generation is enacted through a wizard in the system. It allows you to choose which fields will appear. The normalized names are what appears on the log. You can do incremental logs or start from the beginning and produce a privilege log that's all of the privileged documents in the database. You can refresh just the incremental part that you're working on. So there are a lot of options, even though we've put a lot of kind of restrictions around people in some ways so that we improve their efficiency, but there is also a lot of flexibility in what they can do in their final product. And here we have just a screen where we are saving on the bottom. Each of the finished privilege logs are maintained in the database. Version control was always awful with privilege logs because it would leave the database and then it would go to an associate and then a senior associate and then a partner, and people would make handwritten edits on it, and other people would enter it in Excel, and somebody would make a Word table, and then they would send it to the other side, and then we wouldn't get a copy of it, and then the database doesn't match what the privilege log that actually went out says. So keeping everything inside relativity, having only one draft at a time, really helps us control that spread of information.
John, I really love the passion for the product. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
And
thanks a lot.
see you. Good to meet you.